The same airport echo followed my daughter's heels as she tossed, "Now she's finally alone," over her shoulder. Still, I smiled like a mother does, quietly, even when it stings. As the sliding doors sealed behind her, I gripped the eviction notice in my coat pocket. While she posted selfies from her flight, I faced the debt her silence let rot. That's when I realized I wasn't the one abandoned. I was the one underestimated. So I welcomed her home, with every consequence she thought I'd clean up alone. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The curb at Terminal B was crowded with goodbyes, families squeezing in last hugs, couples whispering reassurances, children running circles around overloaded suitcases. Helen Marshall stayed behind the wheel of her silver sedan, engine idling, while Emma slammed the passenger door shut with one hand and hoisted her designer duffel bag over her shoulder with the other. "Text me when you land," Helen said through the open window, forcing the words out evenly. Emma, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, turned back with a crooked smile. "Sure. Enjoy the peace, Mom. Now you're finally alone." It was said like a joke, a throwaway line tossed into the air like a gum wrapper, but it didn't land that way. Helen blinked. Once. Twice. The corners of her mouth tugged upward automatically. Decades of mothering had made that a reflex. Then Emma was gone, swept into the blur of rolling suitcases and the sterile echo of automatic doors. Helen sat frozen for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the weight of those 5 words settling over her like fog creeping into an old house. "Now you're finally alone." She pulled away from the terminal, merging into traffic with mechanical precision. The silence inside the car was louder than the chaos outside. Emma had always known how to sting her without raising her voice, a gentle slap made sharper by its softness. Alone. She was right, in a way. Tom was gone. 2 years now. A sudden heart attack that stole more than just a husband. It stole the man who had buffered Helen from the jagged parts of Emma. Helen turned onto Route 57, the familiar route home made unfamiliar by the hollow in her chest. Her mind didn't drift so much as tumble, slipping into memory the way it did when she was tired or raw or both. Emma, at 15, slamming her bedroom door during another fight about curfews. Emma, at 23, canceling dinner last minute because a networking event came up. Emma, at 26, staring blankly at the funeral flowers like they belonged to someone else's grief. In all those moments, Helen had given her space, told herself, she's still growing, she'll come around. She never did. Helen exhaled slowly, pulling into the tree-lined street of their neighborhood. Golden leaves spun down like coins as she passed the Jenkins house, then the old white bungalow where the Parkers used to live. She paused at the red light just before her block, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel. She couldn't name the feeling rising in her throat. Was it grief? Or something closer to rage? Now you're finally alone. Was that how Emma saw her? Some footnote? A relic? Something inconvenient to discard now that the buffer of Tom's presence was gone? The light turned green. She didn't move. A horn blared behind her, jolting her into motion. Helen pulled into her driveway, the tires crunching against gravel that needed replacing. The house looked smaller than she remembered, the shutters a bit more faded. She sat in the car for a moment longer. Inside that house was the evidence of a lifetime. Birthdays and burnt casseroles and years spent pretending everything was fine. And now, it was all just hers. Emma didn't call it home anymore. Maybe she never had. Unlocking the front door, Helen stepped inside. The air was still and cool, touched with that faint scent of aging wood and furniture polish. She dropped her purse on the side table and stood in the middle of the living room, arms limp at her sides. The silence didn't feel peaceful, it felt hollow. And then she noticed the envelope. It had been slid halfway under the door, unmistakably official, pale beige with her name typed in block letters. She bent down, heart suddenly knocking against her ribs. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tore it open. Notice to vacate, final warning. The words swam in front of her eyes before sharpening into cruel focus. Unpaid rent, final deadline, legal action imminent. Helen blinked once, then again. Alone. She felt her knees weaken, but she didn't fall. Instead, she straightened up slowly, the envelope crackling in her grip. Emma didn't know it yet, but being alone didn't mean helpless. Helen's gaze moved to the corner of the room, where Tom's old desk sat, still untouched, drawers filled with whatever secrets he never got the chance to explain. Her next breath came steadier. Let her enjoy her little vacation, Helen thought coldly. She had no idea what she'd be flying home to. The envelope lay on the kitchen counter like something poisonous. Helen didn't move at first. She just stared at the stark black print, the legal language compressed into sharp, merciless lines. When she finally lowered herself into a chair, the wood groaned under her weight, the sound slicing through the silence. She read every sentence slowly, refusing to blink. 4 days. That was all she had before the sheriff would arrive, before her belongings could be piled on the curb in front of neighbors pretending not to stare. Before the house, Tom's house, their house, would belong to someone else. Her throat tightened. She set the paper down with deliberate care, pressing her palm flat against it as if she could pin reality in place. 4 days. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly, nagging at her, mocking her. She glanced up at it, then reached for her phone. Her hands were steady now, not because she felt calm, but because she refused to be anything else. She scrolled to Sarah Miller, breathing slow and deep, then tapped the call button. 1 ring, 2, 3. The voicemail clicked on. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." Helen closed her eyes. She didn't speak. The tone beeped, and still she said nothing. What was she supposed to leave? "Hey, I'm being kicked out of my home. Call me when you're free." Her lawyer would hear the panic in her voice. She couldn't afford panic. She hung up. The chair legs scraped against the tile as she pushed back and stood. She walked over to the window and pressed her hand against the glass, watching a couple walk their dog across the street, oblivious to the war erupting quietly inside the house across from them. Everything outside looked unchanged, perfectly ordinary. But inside, the air felt charged, as if the foundation itself was beginning to crack. Her gaze drifted back to the eviction notice. Unpaid balance, failure to remit payment. Final action will be taken. She could almost hear Tom's voice, calm, reassuring, promising he had everything under control. He'd always sounded so certain, even when the numbers didn't add up, even when she questioned the late-night calls and closed-door conversations. Her chest ached. After the funeral, the truth came in fragments. Letters from credit agencies, unexpected bills, bank statements that didn't make sense. She remembered standing at the dining table, papers spread out like a map of landmines she never saw coming. "Just small loans," Tom used to say. "Nothing to worry about, sweetheart." Small loans didn't destroy people, but secrets did. And he hadn't told Emma either. Helen had hoped that shared confusion might bridge something between them. Instead, Emma pushed away harder, angry that life wasn't unfolding the way she expected. Angry that her father had left them chaos instead of comfort. Helen swallowed hard. Somewhere deep inside, anger flickered, sharp, controlled, and rising. All those years of forgiveness, all those chances, all those careful motherly excuses, what had they built? A daughter who couldn't wait for the chance to declare her mother alone. Helen's jaw tightened. Emma had no idea how close they were to losing everything. No idea how much Helen had shielded her from. No idea that the safety she took for granted was already collapsing. Helen picked up the eviction notice again, smoothing the creases as if preparing for battle rather than reading. She walked to the living room and set it down on Tom's old desk, right on top of the dust-coated surface. Her reflection wavered in the glass of the framed photograph beside it. Tom grinning, Emma wrapped around his arm, Helen tucked close. A perfect family snapshot from a lifetime that felt fictional now. Something inside her hardened. Emma was coming home to consequences she had never once imagined, and Helen wouldn't let her brush them aside with another flippant remark or shrug. The days of protecting her from reality were over. She reached for her phone again, but this time her fingers didn't hesitate. She typed a message instead of calling. "Call me when you land, it's important." She didn't add please. She didn't add mom. She read the eviction notice one more time, then folded it cleanly into thirds and slid it into her purse like a loaded weapon. Her pulse hammered steady and fierce. For the first time in a long while, Helen felt completely awake. Emma thinks I'm alone? Fine. Let her think it. Because the next step wasn't panic, it was strategy. And the next conversation with her daughter wasn't going to end in silence. It was going to end with truth that cut deep enough to draw blood. She reached for the drawer handle of Tom's desk, the metal cool against her fingertips, and pulled. The drawer jammed halfway, something large wedged inside. Helen leaned closer, heart beginning to pound again, for a different reason now. Inside the shadows, something thick and rectangular was buried beneath a stack of papers, something she had never seen before. A locked metal box. Her breath caught. The locked metal box was heavier than it looked. Helen set it on Tom's desk and stared at it for a long moment, the dusty light from the nearby window tracing its dull silver edges. The lock was small, but solid. No key in sight. Her heart thudded against her ribs like it was knocking to get out. She checked the top drawer again, then the second one, then pulled the bottom drawer wide open, rifling through old receipts, faded birthday cards, and tangled cords. Nothing. She paused, then stood and crossed the room. Tom's bedside table. She hadn't touched his nightstand in months. The drawer still creaked the same way it always had. Inside, a half-used bottle of cologne, his reading glasses, a watch that had long since stopped ticking, and beneath them, a ring of keys. Her fingers curled around them like they might burn her. Back at the desk, she held her breath and tried the first. Too small. The second didn't even fit. The third slid in, and with a soft click, the box opened. She didn't breathe for several seconds. Inside were stacks of papers, folded legal documents, and a single yellow envelope marked in Tom's handwriting, House, Contingency. Her mouth went dry. Helen pulled the envelope free and opened it carefully. The paper inside was crisp, the ink clean and deliberate. Her eyes scanned the page once, then again. She sank into the desk chair as the words began to register. Tom had amended the will 8 months before his death. The house was still hers, but only if she agreed to certain conditions. If not, the title would pass to Emma, with full ownership contingent on Helen's voluntary relinquishment. Voluntary. She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to remember what was happening in their lives around that time. Emma had been around more, oddly attentive. Tom had been secretive, making phone calls behind closed doors, whispering when she entered the room. Was this what it had all led to? She flipped through the remaining pages. Legal terms blurred in front of her eyes, but the meaning was crystal clear. If she refused to hand over the house willingly, the ownership defaulted to her. But the mortgage debt Tom left behind would fall squarely on her shoulders. Emma, meanwhile, would be released from any responsibility. It was a trap, cleverly disguised as a choice. Helen set the papers down slowly, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but fury. Emma had never said a word, not about the house, not about the will, not even a flicker of acknowledgement that something like this existed. Could she have known? She remembered Emma's 2 quick nods at the lawyer's office, her lack of curiosity, the way she'd brushed off anything remotely adult or financial. "That stuff's over my head," she used to say. Was it? Helen stared at the papers, the silence in the room now sharp and jagged. It wasn't just the legal maneuvering that stung, it was the possibility that Emma had known and let her mother slowly unravel anyway. Watched her drown in debt and grief while pretending to be oblivious. If Emma had known, if she'd let this unfold, just waiting for Helen to give up the house voluntarily, then everything, had been a performance. And if she hadn't known, well, then she was still about to get the truth shoved in her face. Helen stood, clutching the amended will, her jaw set hard. This wasn't just paperwork. It was leverage, a pressure point. Emma may have had the luxury of pretending Helen didn't exist, but that ended now. Helen crossed the room, opened the file cabinet, and pulled out the folder labeled Marshall Estate. She slipped the new documents in and slammed the drawer shut with more force than she meant to. She stared at the desk for a long moment before muttering under her breath, "She wants independence? She can earn it." But even as the words left her lips, a colder question crept in. What if Emma had been counting on this all along? The office building was one of those squat, forgettable structures tucked behind a strip mall. Gray stucco, fluorescent-lit lobby, and the smell of reheated coffee drifting from somewhere near the vending machine. Helen adjusted the strap of her bag and stepped inside, her heels clicking a little too loudly against the cheap tile. Suite 204, Michael Woods, property manager. She took a breath, then knocked. "Come in." Michael didn't look up right away. He was hunched behind a cluttered desk, typing something with 2 fingers, a Bluetooth headset blinking in one ear. When he finally raised his eyes, they swept over her with professional detachment, already calculating. "Helen Marshall," he said, folding his hands on the desk like he was preparing for a chess game. "You got my notice." "I did." She stayed standing. "That's why I'm here." He gestured at the chair across from him, clearly amused by her formality. "You've got 4 days left. What are we negotiating?" "I'm not here to argue. I'm asking for time," she said evenly. "Just a little more time." Michael leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "You've had time. 30, 60, 90 days. I didn't spring this on you." Helen bit down on her tongue before she said something she'd regret. "I've had setbacks, things my husband left behind that I'm still sorting through. I just found documents, assets that may cover the debt." "May" being the key word, he replied, smiling with no warmth. "Helen, I run properties, not charities. I've already lined up a tenant willing to sign and pay in full. No drama, no delay. I can get you a partial payment now. The rest within 2 weeks." She opened her bag, pulled out the folded page from Tom's estate, the will amendment, and placed it on the edge of the desk. Michael's eyes flicked to it, but he didn't reach for it. "A will?" "A legal pathway to funds I didn't know I had. It's tied up in technicalities, but it's real. I'm not bluffing." "I'm sure you believe that," he said, pushing the paper back toward her with 2 fingers. "But I don't do maybe. I do paid." Helen stiffened. "This house isn't some abandoned rental. It's been my home for over 20 years. And lately a liability," he said with a shrug. "You haven't paid full rent in months. You ignore maintenance notices. You've let the landscaping go to hell. You're not living there. You're withering there." The words hit like a slap, and Helen blinked hard to hold back the sting behind her eyes. "I buried my husband. I picked up every piece of what he left behind while trying to keep my daughter from falling apart. Her voice dropped into something steelier. You think that gives you license to talk to me like I'm squatting? Michael raised a brow. No, ma'am. But it does make you someone I can't count on. He turned toward his monitor, clearly done with the conversation. Helen didn't move. Not yet. I'll fight this, she said softly. You might win in court, but it won't be clean. Michael glanced at her sideways. Is that a threat? It's a promise, she said, picking up the paper and slipping it back into her bag. You might own the lease, but you don't own me. He offered her a condescending smile. You've got 4 days. Make them count. Helen walked out without another word. The air outside hit her like a slap of wind. Sharp, cold, humbling. She stood in the parking lot, keys in her fist, watching the traffic drone by as if the world hadn't just tried to crush her under its heel. She got in the car and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. Michael was right. There wasn't time. But there was still something else. Emma. The will. The money. Whether her daughter liked it or not, they were in this together now. She started the engine. The dashboard clock blinked 2:46. Emma's flight would be landing in a few hours, and when she walked back into that house, expecting her usual cold shoulder and soft bed, Helen would be waiting. Helen sat in the lobby outside Sarah Miller's office, her hands clenched around the amended will like she was holding the trigger to something explosive. The receptionist had already offered her coffee twice. She declined both times. Hot liquid felt like too much weight. She was holding enough of that already. Through the frosted glass door, she could see the blur of Sarah finishing a call, gesturing in sharp, swift motions. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Helen, Sarah said, voice softer than she looked. Come back. They stepped into the office, warm, wood-paneled law books stacked in neat rows, degrees framed in polished silver. It smelled like leather and peppermint. Safe. But nothing felt safe right now. Helen placed the envelope on the desk with deliberate precision, as though offering evidence in court. I need you to read this, she said. Sarah slipped on her glasses and unfolded the document. The seconds stretched thin, heavy. The only sound was the faint ticking from the small clock on the shelf behind her. Then Sarah's eyes widened. Helen, where did you get this? Tom's desk, Helen said. Hidden. Locked away. Sarah exhaled slowly, scanning the pages again, flipping to the last notarized signature. This was filed just 6 weeks before he passed, she said, voice low. This is legitimate. It supersedes the previous will. Helen's stomach twisted. So the house? It defaults to Emma, Sarah said, tapping the clause with her pen. But only if you voluntarily surrender ownership. If you refuse, it stays in your name, but the debt becomes yours alone. Helen leaned back as if the chair suddenly tilted. Why would he do that? Sarah hesitated. Rare for her. She folded her hands, choosing her words. My guess? He wanted Emma to step up. Maybe he thought forcing responsibility would make her grow up. And he trusted you to guide that process. Guide. Manage. Absorb impact. Always the mother. Always the buffer. Helen stared past Sarah, her gaze drifting to the skyline visible through the window, buildings sharp against the late afternoon light, like teeth. So it was a test, Helen whispered. He turned our lives into an exam Emma never even showed up to take. Sarah nodded gently. It's cruel, Helen. You deserve transparency. Cruel didn't cover it. Cruel was burying someone without knowing what they'd buried inside you. Helen felt her breath tighten, chest constricting with a pressure she hadn't let herself feel since the week of the funeral. Betrayal wasn't loud. It was silent. Slow. A leak that rotted everything from the inside. He didn't trust me to handle the truth, she said. He didn't trust her to handle responsibility. And now we're all drowning in what he thought would save us. Sarah closed the file. You need to talk to Emma, she said. There's no legal path forward without her involvement. If she refuses to cooperate, you lose the house. And if you hand it over, she inherits it outright. Helen laughed, a short, bitter sound. So I'm begging my daughter for help, or giving her everything. Not begging, Sarah corrected. Leverage. You have information she doesn't. Helen swallowed. What if she does know? What if she's known for months, and she's been waiting for me to break? The silence between them shifted. Heavy, unspoken fears taking form. I don't think Emma is calculating, Sarah said gently, though her tone carried uncertainty. But she is self-absorbed. She might have ignored something she didn't want to deal with. Helen stood slowly, shoulders squared as though bracing against a storm wind. If she's been waiting for me to fall apart, she's about to see something else. Sarah rose with her, setting a hand on Helen's arm. You're not alone in this. I'll be there every step. But you need to decide what kind of battle you're willing to fight. Helen stared down at the pages one last time, the neat black print that had just rewritten the last 2 years of her life. She remembered Emma's voice at the airport. Now you're finally alone. Maybe Tom believed forcing their hands would repair what grief had broken. Maybe he'd thought pressure would forge steel. Instead, it forged something sharper. Helen folded the papers and slipped them into her bag. Her voice was steady when she spoke. I'm done waiting for her to care. She's going to see exactly what real consequences look like. She turned toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Sarah called after her. Helen, be prepared. Emma won't react well. Helen didn't stop walking. That's fine, she said. Neither will I. Helen heard the front door before she saw her daughter. Keys jangling, a suitcase thudding over the threshold, the faint sound of Emma's voice on the phone. Yeah, Lila, I'm back. Ugh, the jet lag is already kicking my ass. This flight was brutal. Helen stood in the hallway, arms crossed, the amended will in one hand and the eviction notice in the other. No words. Not yet. Just waited. Emma breezed into view in leggings and an oversized hoodie, skin sun-kissed from her trip, designer tote slung over one shoulder. She didn't see her mother at first, just dropped her bag by the staircase and kicked off her shoes like she was sliding into a spa weekend. Then she looked up. Oh, Emma said, stopping mid-sentence on her call. Hey, you're... Here. Helen raised the 2 papers wordlessly. Emma frowned. Can I call you back? She mumbled into the phone, then hung up before waiting for a response. What's going on? She asked, cautious now. Eviction, Helen said. 4 days left. And a will your father never told either of us about. But maybe you knew. Emma's eyes darted to the documents. Wait, what? Helen handed them over. Watched her daughter's expression twist from confusion to annoyance to something bordering on panic. Emma skimmed. What even is this? I didn't know about this. Why would you think I did? Helen's jaw locked. Because you walked out of this house like it was a hotel you'd outgrown. Because your father rewrote our future behind my back and handed you control I never knew existed. And because for the last 2 years, you've acted like I was an inconvenience instead of a mother. Emma flinched. Okay. Wow. No, not wow, Emma. Reality. Helen's voice was rising, slow and cold. We are about to lose this house. The house you grew up in. The house your father and I spent decades keeping above water. And you didn't even ask how things were before you took your little vacation. I didn't know, Mom. Helen stepped forward. But you didn't ask either. Emma folded the papers and dropped them on the hallway table like they were junk mail. So what? You want me to fix this? I've got student loans. Rent on my apartment. You live here more than your apartment, Helen snapped. Your mail comes here. Your messes are here. You dump your life in this house and then pretend you're an adult somewhere else. That's not fair, Emma said, folding her arms tight across her chest. No, Helen said, voice sharp. Fair was covering your rent for 6 months after your grad program. Fair was cashing out what was left of our savings when you couldn't hold a job long enough for insurance to kick in. This? She pointed to the notice. This is the cost of Fair. Emma's face was red now. I didn't ask for any of that. No, you just expected it. A silence pressed in. The tension in the room felt electric, like a storm was moments from breaking. Emma stared at her. So what now? You want me to… what? Sign something? Take over the debt? I want you to act like a damn adult, Helen said. This house can't be saved without you. That's the position your father put us in. You want to talk about unfair? That's it. Emma looked away, shaking her head. I can't deal with this. I just got back. I'm exhausted. You're ambushing me with paperwork and blame. Because you ran from everything after your father died, Helen said, stepping closer. And now, there's nowhere left to run. Emma picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder. If this is what it's going to be like, maybe I should just go. Stay at Chase's for a while. Helen didn't flinch. Then pack more than a weekend bag. Emma blinked at her, thrown by the coldness. Seriously? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. You'd rather burn it all down? Helen met her eyes without blinking. No. But I'm done pretending that letting you walk away fixes anything. Emma didn't move. Her hand hovered near the door. Neither spoke. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Emma hadn't left yet, but her silence said more than a slammed door ever could. She stayed upstairs, behind closed walls, earbuds in, phone glued to her hand. Helen didn't bother knocking. Instead, she returned to the desk. The metal box had already surrendered its biggest bombshell, but something in her gut said there was more. She opened every drawer of Tom's filing cabinet, leafing through folders labeled medical, insurance, IRA. Most of it was routine, mundane. But wedged in the back of the bottom drawer, behind a stack of yellowed tax forms, she found a folder she didn't recognize. No label, just a thin rubber band wrapped around it twice. Inside, old bank statements, names of accounts she didn't know existed. One account in particular caught her breath. It was recent, active. And the balance, Helen reread it twice, disbelieving, was more than enough to clear their debt. Possibly enough to pay off the house entirely. The name on the account, Thomas Marshall, joint co-signatory, Emma Marshall. Helen's hands went cold. There was no mention of her, not even as a beneficiary. She reached for her phone, heart pounding, and dialed the bank listed on the statement. After passing through a maze of extensions and polite voices, she was transferred to a branch manager. Yes, ma'am, the woman confirmed. We do show a safety deposit box associated with that account. I'd like access to it, Helen said. Unfortunately, we can't authorize entry without both account holders present, the woman explained. It's a dual authentication agreement. Both Emma and yourself would need to be here in person. Helen thanked her, hung up, and sat back in the chair. The room spun just slightly. Her mind reeled. Tom had given Emma power, not just symbolic, real, legal, financial control. While Helen had been navigating grief and unpaid bills, he'd been quietly building an escape hatch and handing Emma the key. And Emma had done nothing with it. Unless she didn't know. Or worse, she did. And chose silence anyway. Helen stood and marched up the stairs, knocked once, then twice, louder. No response. Emma. Still nothing. She opened the door. Emma was lying on her bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had changed, earbuds in, music loud enough to mask a hurricane. Helen reached over and yanked one earbud out. Emma sat up, scowling. Jesus, knock. We need to talk, Helen said. Now. About what? More guilt? More paperwork? Helen held up the statement. This. Emma stared at it, confused. What is it? A bank account. In your name. And your father's. With enough money to change everything. Money that's locked in a box we can't open unless you show up. Emma blinked. I've never seen this before. You're on the account, Emma. Legally. This didn't happen without your name. Your signature. Your father made sure of that. I don't remember signing anything, she muttered, defensive. Maybe it was when I was helping him with the hospital forms, or that weird time he asked me to come with him to the bank. I didn't ask questions. That's the problem, Helen snapped. You never ask questions. And now we're standing at the edge of a cliff, and you're the one holding the damn bridge. Emma looked down at the floor. I don't want to get involved in this. It's too much. Helen felt the words like a slap. Again. The same evasion. The same emotional cowardice. So that's it? She asked quietly. You'd rather let us lose everything than take one afternoon to fix it? Emma didn't answer. Helen turned without another word, went downstairs and closed the door behind her. She stood in the kitchen, heart hammering, shame crawling up her spine, not her own, but Tom's, for trusting the wrong person. She picked up her phone and dialed Sarah. When her voice came on the line, Helen didn't wait. I need to know if there's a legal way around a joint safety deposit box. If one party refuses. Sarah paused. There might be. But it won't be simple. Helen looked toward the living room window where the house looked smaller now, fragile like it might vanish with the next gust of wind. Nothing about this has been simple, she said. The sky hung low over the neighborhood like a closing lid, thick with clouds and the slow, certain threat of rain. Helen stood at the kitchen counter, her phone vibrating uselessly next to the coffee pot, as her eyes scanned the printout Sarah had emailed over. A draft petition for a court injunction. She hadn't wanted to go this route, not because she was afraid, but because she was tired. But now, with Emma refusing to sign and Michael's threats growing louder by the hour, the path was narrowing into a single brutal choice: fight or vanish. She circled tomorrow's date on the calendar in red. Thursday, eviction day. Behind her, Emma walked in, face pale, phone clutched tight. Any updates? Helen didn't look up. I'm working on it. Emma hovered near the edge of the kitchen like she might bolt. It's just, this feels like it's dragging. Can we just do something already? Helen turned slowly. Do what, exactly? You won't go to the bank. You won't sign the will addendum. You won't even make a call to the landlord. Emma's arms folded across her chest. Because none of that feels like it'll work. Why are we wasting time on half measures? Just sell the house and be done with it. Helen froze. Excuse me? I mean, Emma said quickly. You've been miserable here for years. Dad's gone. The bills are a mess. Maybe this is the universe's way of saying, move on. Helen stepped closer. This house is not just wood and drywall, it's my marriage, your childhood. Every second I swallowed my own needs to keep this family upright. Emma looked away, ashamed, or worse, indifferent. I'm not giving it up, Helen said. Not like this, not to him. Before Emma could ask who, Helen grabbed her keys. Where are you going? Emma asked. To remind Michael Woods who he's dealing with. The property management office felt colder this time. Maybe it was just her. The receptionist gave a curt nod before buzzing her through. Michael didn't stand when she entered. He just raised his eyebrows like she was late to a meeting he never invited her to. Helen, he said, clasping his hands behind his head. We are really milking the clock, aren't we? She stepped up to the desk, dropping a folder in front of him. That's a draft injunction. If you move forward with the eviction, I will file this in court first thing tomorrow. Michael sighed, leaned forward, and opened the folder. He barely glanced at it before pushing it back. This isn't your play, he said. You've had months to get your affairs in order. No judge is going to freeze me out now. You've refused partial payments, turned down mediation, and failed to provide proof of maintenance attempts. Your rent increases are unsubstantiated, and you've let this process deteriorate in bad faith. That is my play, Helen said calmly. Michael chuckled, shaking his head. You really think some last-minute paperwork is going to scare me? I think you underestimated the wrong woman, she said. He stood now, face tightening just slightly. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're out of time. That sheriff's notice is still valid. If you're not out by Thursday, they will be. Helen nodded slowly. Then I'll see you in court on Friday. His eyes narrowed. You won't win. Helen turned to go. Maybe not, but you won't walk away clean. By the time she got home, the rain had started, fat drops tapping like fingers on the roof. The living room was dim, Emma curled up on the couch under a blanket, the TV glowing silently in front of her. Helen dropped her wet bag on the floor and stood for a long time, looking at her daughter. Emma muted the screen. Well? He's not backing down. Emma let out a soft, bitter laugh. So, that's it? No, Helen said. It's not. We're filing an injunction. Sarah's helping. Emma sat up straighter. That sounds expensive. It is. Helen didn't sugarcoat it. But we don't have a choice. Emma ran her hands through her hair. God. This is exhausting. Helen almost said, try living it, but she didn't. She just nodded, walked into the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water with hands that didn't quite stop shaking. Outside, the wind picked up. A branch tapped sharply against the window pane. Tick, tick, tick. The countdown was almost over. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke overnight. Wind lashed the trees against the siding, and rain came down like it was trying to wash the house off the map. Helen sat at the dining table in a worn flannel robe, the draft injunction open in front of her, along with Sarah's follow-up notes and the amended will. Her coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago. Across from her, Emma sat cross-legged in leggings and one of Tom's old college sweatshirts, hair pulled into a lazy bun. Her eyes were tired, but her jaw was set like stone. Neither had spoken for minutes. You're not going to guilt me into this, Emma finally said. Helen didn't flinch. I'm not trying to guilt you. You're literally staring at me with legal paperwork and a court date on the table. I'm staring at a house that's about to be gone, Helen replied. I'm staring at everything your father left behind, and everything you're refusing to lift a finger to save. Emma dropped her gaze. Helen slid the document across the table. One signature, that's it. You walk into the bank with me. We open the safety deposit box. We use the funds inside to pay off the debt. We stop the eviction. Emma didn't reach for the pen. What's the catch? You stay involved, Helen said. No more disappearing. No more ghosting when it's inconvenient. You help me fix what's left. Emma's lips parted like she was going to argue, but she didn't. She just looked tired, worn in a way Helen hadn't seen since the funeral. Why did he put me on the account? Emma asked quietly. Why not you? Helen hesitated. I don't know. Maybe he thought you'd need it one day, or maybe he thought giving you responsibility would force you to grow up. Emma scoffed. Well, he clearly miscalculated. Helen met her eyes. That's why this choice matters. Emma stared down at the form for a long beat. Then she picked up the pen. Okay, she said. I'll sign. But this doesn't make me the villain, you know. Helen didn't argue. She didn't have the energy to. Emma signed with quick, almost careless strokes. like she didn't want to think about what it meant. As the pen clicked shut, Helen felt a strange wave of nausea, relief tangled with resentment. She needed Emma's help, but needing it didn't make it right. She gathered the paperwork, slid it into a clean envelope. "We'll go to the bank first thing tomorrow." "Fine," Emma said, pushing her chair back. Helen paused before she stood. "You didn't ask what happens if we don't." Emma's back was already turned. "Because I don't want to hear it." Helen watched her walk away. The kitchen light flickered above her head like it might burn out. She sat back down and rubbed her temples. A signature was a step, but not a fix. Not yet. At 9:02 the next morning, they walked into the bank. The vault floor was sterile and silent like a tomb. The box was retrieved, opened, and inside, exactly what Helen hoped for. Bonds. Cash. Enough. Emma sat back on the metal bench, stunned. "He really left all this?" "Yes," Helen said. "For us, but with strings." They spent the next hour transferring funds, initiating payment, printing proof for the court. By noon, the eviction was technically paid in full. And yet, as Helen walked to the car beside Emma, a strange chill gripped her. Emma had helped. Yes, but she hadn't changed. Back at the house, Helen placed the receipt and stamped court motion in the folder beside the will. Emma flopped onto the couch and scrolled her phone like nothing seismic had just happened. Helen stared at her for a long moment. "You did the right thing," she said. Emma didn't look up. "I did the necessary thing." Helen nodded once, turning away. The weight in her chest hadn't lifted. It had simply shifted. The house was safe for now. But peace hadn't returned. Because Helen finally understood something that made her skin go cold. Emma hadn't saved the house to protect her mother. She'd saved it to avoid being blamed when it burned. The clock on the living room wall ticked past 10 a.m. Helen sat at the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, hair still damp from a rushed shower. A folder rested on the coffee table. Bank receipts, legal notices, and the stamped motion to halt the eviction. Everything she'd done, everything they'd barely pulled together, was supposed to buy time. But now, the time was gone. The eviction deadline had passed. She flinched at the sound of a heavy knock on the front door. Not frantic. Official. Her breath caught. Emma looked up from the kitchen where she was stabbing her spoon into a bowl of cereal like it had personally offended her. "Don't answer it," she said flatly. Helen was already standing. Through the peephole, she saw a uniformed officer. Behind him, a white SUV idled at the curb. Michael Woods leaned against the hood with a cup of coffee in hand, like he was early for brunch. Helen opened the door, just a crack. "Ma'am," the deputy said, "we were told this property is in active eviction status." "It was," Helen said, steadying her voice. "But the debt has been paid. In full. I have the receipt, the motion, and confirmation from the county clerk." The officer blinked, caught off guard. "May I see it?" Helen turned, grabbed the folder from the table and handed it through the crack. He flipped through it slowly. Behind him, Michael pushed off the car and started walking up the driveway. Smug grin growing with each step. "You filed this yesterday?" the deputy asked. "Yes." "Stamped and accepted. Which means you have no authority to proceed." Michael stopped at the porch, hands in his pockets. "She's bluffing. The system doesn't move that fast." Helen stepped outside, folder still in hand. "You're not the system, Michael. You're a man who thought I'd roll over." The deputy raised a hand, holding Michael back. "Sir, I need to confirm this with the clerk's office." Michael's jaw ticked. "You've got to be kidding me." "I'd suggest waiting in your vehicle," the officer said. Michael muttered something under his breath and stalked back to his car. Helen closed the door and leaned against it, breath catching in her chest. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, arms folded. "So, what now?" "Now," Helen said. We escalate. 2 hours later, Sarah met Helen at her office with a legal pad and a look of grim approval. You did good, she said. But he's going to retaliate. If he can't get you out through rent, he'll come after you for breach, nuisance, whatever sticks. Helen nodded. Then we go after him first. You want to sue? I want to expose every unethical thing he's done: harassment, refusal of payment, threats, predatory hikes. Sarah exhaled. That means court, testimony, possibly weeks of hearings. I don't care, Helen said. This ends when I say it does. At home that evening, Emma paced like a caged animal. This can't drag on forever, she snapped. I have a job, a life. I can't just keep sitting in this limbo with you. You helped cause the limbo, Helen replied coolly. You don't get to complain about the weather while I'm holding up the roof. Emma threw up her hands. Fine. You want this to be your crusade? Knock yourself out. But don't expect me to keep pretending I care. Helen stood slowly from the couch. I don't expect anything from you anymore. Emma flinched, just slightly. Good. She grabbed her keys and purse and was gone before the door even finished closing. Later that night, Helen sat alone at the dining table, flipping through a draft complaint Sarah had sent over. Names, dates, screenshots of text messages and failed maintenance requests. It was more than a petition now. It was a declaration of war. The house was silent except for the storm outside. Rain again. Always rain lately. Helen stood, walked to the hallway mirror, and stared at herself. She looked older than she remembered, but harder too. Not broken, just forged. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. You're making a mistake. Drop this, or it won't just be your house you lose. Helen stared at the screen. Then, without hesitation, deleted the message and powered off the phone. The late afternoon light cut through the living room blinds in long golden bars. Dust hung in the still air like tiny reminders of all the things left unsaid. Helen stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the driveway. Emma was 10 minutes late. She expected that. What she didn't expect was the way her heart still picked up the moment she saw Emma's car pull in, even after everything. The front door opened without a knock. Emma stepped inside, sunglasses perched on her head, her lips already drawn into a line. I don't have long, Mom. Can we just talk through whatever this is? This isn't a drive-through, Helen said calmly. Sit down. Emma rolled her eyes, but she dropped her bag on the floor and took a seat on the edge of the couch like she might spring back up at any second. Helen didn't sit. She walked to the coffee table and laid out everything. Again. The will. The bank documents. The court filing against Michael. The eviction notice. Now marked paid in bold red across the bottom corner. The unopened envelope with a date for their first court appearance. Emma glanced at them with disinterest, like she was being shown homework she didn't feel like doing. I know all this already, she said, waving vaguely toward the paperwork. Why are we doing this again? Because you still don't get it, Helen said. Her voice was quiet, but sharp. You helped put out the fire, but you lit more matches walking away than you ever did staying. Emma scoffed. Is this where I'm supposed to grovel or something? No, I'm done asking you for anything. I just want to say what I need to say before we either move forward or not at all. That got Emma's attention. Helen finally sat, folding her hands. You've treated this house like a burden, me like a problem to escape. You ignored your father's debts, ignored the eviction, ignored me. You signed papers only when your own name was at risk, and the second the crisis passed, you vanished again. Emma's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. You blamed me for the mess without ever asking how deep it really went. You wanted freedom without responsibility. Comfort without sacrifice. You wanted a mother who would be invisible unless needed. Emma sat back slowly, expression unreadable. Helen continued. And I let you. For years. Because I wanted peace. Because I thought that was love. She leaned forward. But peace without honesty is just silence. And silence nearly cost me this house. Emma crossed her arms. You don't think you've been harsh? Judgmental? Controlling? I've been surviving, Helen said. You were vacationing. That landed hard. Emma's mouth opened, then closed again. I'm not saying I was perfect, Helen said, softer now. But I was here. While you were out trying to outrun the mess, I lived in it, ate it, slept in it. I was the one answering the phone when the bank called. I was the one who stood between our lives and the wreckage your father left behind. I didn't ask you to, Emma muttered. No, you just expected it. Silence stretched. Then finally, Emma looked up. Okay, fine. Maybe I haven't handled things well. Maybe I wanted to believe it wasn't my problem because that was easier than facing how screwed up everything was. Helen didn't blink. I was scared, Emma said, barely above a whisper. I still am. Helen nodded slowly. Then be scared, but show up anyway. Emma looked down at her hands. You have a choice, Helen said. We fight together. Or you walk away, and you don't come back. No phone calls, no holidays, no second chances. Emma looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was still tight. This is really an ultimatum? Helen nodded once. This is the line. Emma didn't answer right away, but her phone buzzed on the couch between them. She glanced at it, brow furrowing. Helen watched her closely. Emma picked it up and read the screen. Her face shifted from annoyance to something more unsettled. What is it? Helen asked. Emma swallowed. It's from Michael, she said. He wants to meet. Alone. The next morning, Helen came downstairs to the smell of burned toast and the sound of fingers tapping rapidly on a keyboard. Emma sat at the dining table with her laptop open, her phone wedged between her shoulder and ear. Yes, hi. Could you resend the breakdown of the property tax estimate? And can you itemize the late fees from last quarter? Pause. No, I don't need my mom on the call. I'm the joint account holder. Helen leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Emma caught her eye and gave a tight smile before turning away. Thanks. Email is fine. She hung up and began scribbling notes into a leather-bound planner Helen had never seen before. Helen stepped closer. You're up early. Emma glanced up, figured I'd take the reins, like we talked about. If this house is going to survive, we need more than duct tape and legal threats. It might have sounded reassuring, if not for the forced cheerfulness and the fact that Emma had scheduled a blowout appointment for later that afternoon. Helen noticed the receipt open on Emma's screen, an Amazon order confirmation. 4 items, none of them necessary. You're still shopping? It was just some skincare stuff and a portable printer, Emma said. We'll need it when we start prepping for court. Helen didn't reply. She walked to the sink and ran cold water over her wrists, letting the sharp chill help steady her. By noon, Emma had drafted a color-coded spreadsheet of monthly expenses, upcoming legal fees, and suggested household cuts that didn't include her gym membership, but did include canceling Helen's grocery delivery subscription. You think I'm going to drive 20 minutes just to get food now? Helen asked. You could if we stopped wasting money on convenience, Emma said brightly. The edge of Helen's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something colder. This isn't a budget rebrand, she said. It's a war room. You think some pastel spreadsheet is going to stop Michael from circling this house like a vulture? Emma bristled. I'm trying to help. You wanted me involved, remember? Helen sat down across from her, opened the court motion, and pulled out the latest update from Sarah. Michael had filed a counterclaim, demanding immediate repayment. Again. He's pushing for another eviction, Helen said. He's not backing off. And your little pie chart isn't going to scare him. Emma's face twisted. Then what? You want to just hand this over to a lawyer and pray? I want to stop pretending that your idea of control is anything but chaos and heels. Emma's jaw dropped. That's not fair. No. What's not fair is watching you order a $70 face serum while I'm fielding calls from court clerks and roof inspectors. You're blowing this out of proportion. Helen stood. You're trying to look like you're in charge so you don't have to feel responsible. I am responsible, Emma snapped. Then act like it, Helen said, voice cutting. Because if you keep making decisions like this, you'll take us both down. Emma shoved back from the table, the chair legs screeching across the floor. You know what your problem is? You want me to help? But only if I do it exactly your way. The second I think for myself, I'm suddenly reckless? No, Helen said. The second you think for yourself, you make it all about you. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away with practiced precision. Maybe Dad didn't trust you for a reason. The words hit like a slap. Helen didn't move, didn't blink. But something deep inside her cracked. You're right, she said after a beat. Maybe he didn't. But he trusted you even less. He just hoped you'd grow into the role. Emma stared at her like she'd been punched. I'm trying. Try harder, Helen said, picking up the folder and walking out. That night, the house felt like it had been split in half. They didn't speak over dinner. Helen ate alone in the kitchen while Emma locked herself in her room, music seeping through the door like a wall of sound to drown out consequence. Helen opened her laptop, pulled up the draft Sarah had warned her about, and began rewriting it, without Emma's name anywhere near the documents. Outside, the porch light flickered once, then died. The house was still dark when Helen slipped into the hallway with her phone and a file folder tucked under her arm. Emma's door was closed, the faint bass of music pulsing beneath it. She didn't stop to listen. Downstairs, the living room was lit only by the soft glow of a single table lamp. Helen sat on the edge of the couch, opened her laptop, and dialed Sarah's number with trembling fingers. You're early, Sarah said, voice low but alert. Helen's voice was barely above a whisper. I want to file a counterclaim. There was a pause. Helen, that's a serious escalation. I know, Sarah exhaled. You want to go after Michael for unfair eviction? And breach of contract, Helen said. Negligence, emotional damages if we have to. I want this on record, and I want it to stick. You're sure you're ready for this? Helen looked at the ceiling, toward the room where her daughter slept like she'd earned the right. I've never been more sure. By noon, Sarah had sent over the first draft, a sharp, strategic counterclaim that turned the pressure back on Michael Woods. Helen didn't tell Emma. Not yet. That afternoon, Emma came down in yoga pants and a fresh blowout, holding 2 iced lattes like a peace offering. She placed one on the table near Helen's laptop. I've been thinking, she said breezily. Maybe we should shift the estate planning to an independent advisor. Someone younger, more modern. Helen looked up slowly. You mean someone who'll tell you what you want to hear? Emma blinked. I mean someone who won't get stuck in the weeds. Helen shut the laptop. The weeds are where the truth lives. Emma's smile faded. You've been in a bad mood all day. What now? What now? Helen said, rising. Is you listening for once? She walked into the kitchen, grabbed the thick folder Sarah had couriered over and dropped it on the table in front of Emma. That's a formal counterclaim. Filed, stamped. We're suing Michael Woods. Emma's jaw tightened. You're kidding. I'm not. You didn't even run this by me. Helen met her eyes. I didn't need to. I'm not interested in another budget makeover or half-baked pitch to sell the house to someone on your Instagram feed. I'm interested in winning. Emma's voice rose. This isn't just your fight. It stopped being yours the moment you ordered silk pillowcases while I was calculating which bill could be paid late. Emma scoffed, but Helen pressed forward. I know you've been emailing Sarah behind my back. I know you've been asking about inheritance loopholes and trying to access the estate account solo. Emma looked like she'd been slapped. Helen's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. You're not subtle, Emma. You're just selfish. Emma stood, but Helen didn't budge. You think I'm being dramatic? She said. But every step you've taken in this house has been to preserve your comfort, not our survival. And I'm done letting you confuse the two. Emma's hands trembled slightly at her sides. You don't get to lock me out. Not after dragging me into this. I'm not locking you out, Helen said. I'm locking in the only strategy that's actually working. Michael tried to ambush us again this week. Sarah blocked it. That wouldn't have happened if I'd waited for you to print more color-coded nonsense. Emma was silent. The judge will see the claim next week. That buys us more time. Maybe weeks. Emma sank slowly into the chair across from her. And you just did this without telling me. I needed it done right, Helen said. Not delayed. Not decorated. Emma didn't speak for a long moment. She picked up the latte she'd brought and set it down again without sipping. So what happens now? She asked. Helen looked at her. Really looked. She saw the girl beneath the gloss. The child who used to beg for 5 more minutes of bedtime stories. And now, a woman unraveling, thread by thread, because consequence had finally come calling. We use the time we have, Helen said, voice steady, to fix what we can. And if you're not capable of doing that with me, then I'll do it alone. Emma didn't protest. But later, as Helen returned to her office, she noticed something strange. Emma's phone left face down on the table, screen lit with a notification. Michael Woods. Let's reschedule. Tomorrow. Bring the paperwork. The courtroom wasn't grand. No marble columns, no sweeping arches, just beige walls, flickering fluorescents, and the soft rustle of papers over hushed tension. Still, it felt like a stage. Helen sat in the front row, her hands folded tight in her lap. Sarah sat beside her, briefcase by her feet, fingers tapping silently against the table. Across the aisle, Michael Woods leaned in to whisper something to his attorney, a slick man in a pinstripe suit with the confidence of someone used to steamrolling people who couldn't afford to fight back. Emma sat beside Helen, silent, stiff. Her shoulders were squared, but her heel tapped relentlessly against the courtroom tile. When the judge entered, the room stood. All rise, the bailiff said. Court is now in session. The hearing began with Michael's attorney, who wasted no time. Your Honor, we are here today because Ms. Helen Marshall has repeatedly failed to meet the terms of her lease. We will demonstrate a long-standing pattern of delinquency, avoidance, and hostility toward property management that left my client no choice but to pursue eviction. Helen didn't flinch, but she felt Emma shift beside her. The lawyer continued, presenting neatly organized files, photos of an overgrown yard, maintenance tickets, missed payments, all highlighted in red. They weren't lies, but they weren't the full story either. Sarah stood smoothly. Your Honor, my client has faced hardship. That is not in dispute. But what is in dispute is the unethical behavior of Mr. Woods, behavior we intend to prove. The judge nodded. Proceed. Sarah handed over a thick stack of documents. We've filed a formal counterclaim citing unlawful eviction tactics, refusal of partial payments, predatory rent increases, and harassment, all supported by emails, text messages, and recorded interactions. The judge flipped through the first few pages. Helen watched Michael's lawyer's expression shift. Sarah continued. You'll also see that Ms. Marshall has paid her back rent in full. She secured the necessary funds, despite being given no opportunity to negotiate. Mr. Woods actively dismissed every attempt she made to resolve the issue peacefully. Helen took a breath and stood. "Your Honor," she said. "May I speak?" Sarah gave a small nod. The judge gestured for her to proceed. "I lost my husband 2 years ago," Helen said, voice even. "And since then, I've been playing a game whose rules keep changing. I've been called unreliable, emotional, incompetent, because I grieved, because I didn't have the luxury of running. I stayed. I paid what I could. I asked for time. What I got instead was silence, threats, and a countdown clock to nowhere." Michael shifted uncomfortably, but Helen didn't look at him. She looked at the judge. "This house isn't just a building. It's where I raised my daughter, where I rebuilt my life after losing the only person who ever truly made me feel safe. And I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for fairness." She held up a copy of the eviction notice with the red stamped "paid" across the bottom. "I fulfilled my obligations. It's time he answers for failing his." Silence. Then the judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Marshall." Helen sat down. Beside her, Emma was motionless. Her eyes were wide, her jaw slack. She looked like she was seeing Helen, really seeing her, for the first time. The rest of the hearing moved fast after that. Sarah dismantled Michael's case point by point, and Michael's attorney, once smug, now looked visibly shaken. He objected twice, both times overruled. An hour later, the judge called for a short recess. In the hallway, Emma turned to her mother. "Where did that come from?" she asked, voice hushed. Helen looked at her. "I stopped waiting for someone else to defend me." Emma's gaze dropped. "I thought you were just angry or scared." "I was," Helen said. "But being scared doesn't mean surrendering." Emma nodded slowly, then looked down the hall. Michael stood by the vending machine, talking in low tones on his phone. His suit didn't look so sharp now. As they returned to the courtroom, Sarah leaned in to whisper, "We're not done. But we have momentum." Helen took her seat. She could feel Emma beside her, still quiet, but not out of reach. Not yet. The judge returned and looked over his glasses at the room. "I've reviewed the counterclaim." The gavel hadn't dropped yet, but something had shifted. And then Michael's phone buzzed loudly across the aisle. He grabbed it quickly, silenced it, but not before Helen saw the name flash across the screen. Emma. The judge's voice cut through the heavy silence like the blade Helen had been holding steady for months. "After reviewing all submitted evidence and testimony," he said, flipping one last page on the bench, "this court finds in favor of Ms. Marshall." Helen didn't exhale, not yet. "The eviction notice is nullified. The property manager's actions constitute an abuse of process. Ms. Marshall will be granted 60 additional days to resolve the remaining debt and may file a civil complaint if harassment continues." Now she breathed. Across the aisle, Michael's mouth opened slightly. His attorney leaned in to whisper something urgent, but Helen only watched as his hands curled into fists on the table, impotent and humiliated. Beside her, Emma sat frozen. It took her a moment to realize what had just happened. Helen didn't move, didn't smile. She just absorbed the weight of the moment like a soldier in the aftermath of battle. Her name had been said aloud, in court, in dignity, in victory. The gavel came down. One sharp knock, dismissed. Outside the courthouse, the wind was brisk but clean. No storm clouds today. Helen stood on the steps, eyes lifted toward the pale blue sky. Sarah stood a few feet away talking with reporters. Emma hung back, arms crossed, phone stuffed deep in her coat pocket. Helen turned to her slowly. "You should have told me you were still talking to him." Emma flinched. "It wasn't what you think." "You were going to hand over the documents, Emma." No, she swallowed. I thought if I could find a way to end it faster, on my terms, then maybe I could fix it. Helen stared at her. You still don't get it. This wasn't about speed or control. It was about doing the hard thing the right way. Emma's shoulders sagged. You were right, about all of it. Helen stepped closer. You've had every chance to walk away. I almost did. And yet, Helen said, her voice softening, you stayed. Emma's eyes brimmed, but she blinked fast. What now? Helen reached into her coat and pulled out a folded document, Sarah's revised agreement, one that legally gave Emma co-responsibility if she chose to sign it. She held it out. Now, you help build. Not dictate. Not run. We do it together. Or not at all. Emma hesitated. Then slowly she took the paper. No signature yet. But she didn't hand it back. They rode home in silence. The kind that felt like possibility instead of punishment. That evening, Helen made tea in the quiet kitchen, the warmth of the cup grounding her as she stared out the window. The porch light had been replaced earlier that week. It glowed now, small but steady. From the other room came the low hum of Emma's voice, on a call with the utility company, arranging payment plans. She paused between words, stumbling sometimes, but she was doing it. Not running. Not pretending. When Helen stepped into the living room, Emma looked up from the papers spread across the coffee table. I recalculated the court fees, Emma said. If we hold off on the siding repairs for 2 months, we'll make the next legal milestone without dipping into the bonds. Helen blinked. That's good work. Emma smiled, not brightly, but genuinely. They sat side by side on the couch, tea mugs warming their hands. For the first time in years, the silence between them didn't hurt. I didn't know you had that in you, Emma said quietly. Helen turned her head. Then maybe it's time we both stop assuming who the other is. A pause. Do you still hate me? Emma asked, not quite a joke. No, Helen said. I've just finally stopped making excuses for you. Emma nodded slowly. I'm ready to earn this, if you'll let me. Helen sipped her tea. We'll see. But there was no edge to it, just truth. The next week, Sarah finalized the paperwork. The debt was officially delayed. Michael Woods' name was removed from the case, and a formal investigation into his property management tactics had been quietly opened. Helen never saw him again. The house changed, slowly. So did its energy. Emma painted the spare room herself. Helen restored the garden bed out front. A pair of wind chimes hung on the porch now, subtle, soft, but always present. And one morning, Helen found a note on the fridge in Emma's handwriting. Don't forget to breathe. I've got the phone call today. Helen smiled, folded the note into her pocket. She was no longer standing alone. At the airport, my daughter thought I was alone. But she had no idea what I had left in me. And now, we both have the home and the future we never thought possible.